Boker Tov, everyone. Chag Sameach. So this is going to be on the Kaddish. And I thought this would be a meaningful talk to give because Kaddish is so woven into our daily prayers. I mean, like every single prayer, every day of the week, regardless of what it is, Kaddish is so integrated. And Kaddish is one of those prayers also where on the high holidays there's like a little change that's made. So I'm going to speak about that too. So what we'll do is I'm going to give a very brief history of the Kaddish, and then we'll simply learn what it means, the actual translation, and then I'll share some insights and teachings and the meaning of the Kaddish, okay? So I was quite surprised to hear how old the Kaddish actually is. It's in Aramaic, which, unless you know Aramaic, you may not know it because it's written in Hebrew letters, but the Yitkada, Shemei Rabbah, the Alma Dibara, the Alma in the world Dibara, that is created. You don't say Dibara in Hebrew. You would say Shebara, that was created. So there's a different kind of grammar to the Aramaic. And it was written, actually it was more so compiled during the Talmudic ages. This is about 500 BCE till about 70 CE. And the Kaddish wasn't like a codified set of prayers. It was just verses from the Tanakh, verses from the Bible that were often said by the Rebbeim after they would teach. So these are just verses that would just give praise and thanks to God after different, halachic teachings that would happen. Over time, these were kind of put together to become the Kaddish as we know it. But it's actually a compilation predominantly of different biblical verses. So I'm wearing my Invisalign, so I'm going to just take that out so I can keep it clear. Now, a little less slurring. Okay. And it's kind of like all things sort of start off that way, where just, someone would just from their heart say, Yehi Shmei Rabba Mivarach, may God's name be blessed forever. And then someone else would say, say Shalom, may there be peace as on high as below. And after several generations, someone's like, that's so great. Let's always say that after we, learn Torah. And what's happened progressively, and I was blown away to learn this, there are actually 6 versions of Kaddish now. And this is not version in terms of different denominations or different cultures of Judaism. There are literally 6 different occasions where Kaddish is spoken. So there's Chatzi Kaddish, which is sort of like the ginger slice that you eat in between sushi pieces. It's put in between smaller sections of prayer to sort of punctuate and differentiate from one prayer space to the next. Then there's Kaddish Shalom, complete Kaddish, which is the same thing, just like it's after a full section of prayer. Like when you finish the Shacharit, it's like a full prayer organism. There's the Kaddish Yatom, which is a mourner's Kaddish. There's Kaddish Derabanan, which is traditionally said, as I understand it, after hearing or learning certain agadot, certain stories from the Talmud. There's a version of Kaddish that is said when you finish a whole tractate of learning, like a larger section of Torah study. And then there's a Kaddish that you say specifically at a burial. And they're all very similar. Some are longer than the others, and there are some phrases that come in and out, which you won't talk about here. So what we're going to look at here is just the Kaddish Shalom, which is the full Kaddish, which is what we say at the end of a big service, okay? I'll share one thing that I learned, though, as I was researching. I was curious, why is the Kaddish said for mourners? And as you'll soon learn, when we look at the actual text, there's nothing about dead people. There's nothing about the deceased. There's nothing that's even like honoring the memory or the name or Bezechut, those who have passed. Like, there's nothing there about that. So, a quick story that I read. This is an Agada story told about Rabbi Akiva, who was walking and came across this man who was carrying this big burden. And he thought this was a person, but this was actually a soul, a spirit. And he inquired into this burden, this suffering. And the spirit said, yeah, but when I was alive, I did some really bad things, and now I'm suffering. But I have a child who never met me, and tell this child to say these words for me. So Rabbi Akiva found this child, and it was an illicit child, and everyone in the town where this person no one liked this guy. But Rabbi Akiva taught this child to say the Kaddish. And when this child said the Kaddish, which was basically praising God's name, acknowledging the inexpressible magnitude and greatness of the divine, when that child said that, then this soul was released from their suffering. That's that one story that I read. I'm sure there's a lot more behind that, but this is a part of the tradition of saying Kaddish for those that have passed. It's not about the people that pass. It's about giving all of our attention to the greatness of God's will and divine will. And maybe we'll understand this more as we look through the verses. So if you want to follow along, you can grab a siddur. It's I'm looking at page 426. So again, if you've never really taken time to notice the grammar, whether or not you're very familiar with the Hebrew language, it'll be interesting just to notice the parts that might stand out for you that are clearly not Hebrew, right? Just the grammar, the way it sounds. So, Yitzkadal v'yitzkadash shemei rabbah. Gadol, right, big. May be big and holy, the name, the great name. Bi'alma dibra kirute, v'yamlich malchute. Bi'alma, in this world, dibra, that God created, kirute is God's will. In the world which God has created according to God's will. V'yamlich malchute, melech is like king or sovereign. Malchute is kingdom, so establishing God's kingdom. B'chayechon uvyomechon uvchaye dechol beit Yisrael. You see chay repeated here. During your life, during your days, and during the life of the whole house of Israel. Basically, in our days, in your days, in the future days, in the days of all of the house of Israel. Ba'agala uvizman kariv. Ba'agala, speedily, ubizman kariv, and in coming days, v'yimru amin. If this was Hebrew, this would be like, bimheira, ubizman karov, right? Bimheira is quickly. So it's just interesting the different words that would be used. You wouldn't find these words elsewhere in the liturgy. Right, so this first paragraph is sanctifying, honoring the greatness, the holiness of the great name. And there's one phrase that I think is quite interesting. In the world that God created according to God's will. That particular phrase. And to me, that's a part of why I think this is relevant to just all the different facets of Jewish life, where this is prayed at a funeral and for mourners. Right? The world that God created according to God's will, not our conception, but God's will. Okay? May you establish your kingdom during our life. It's basically saying, it's like the Hermetic principle, as above, so below. As it is in heaven, so shall it be here as well. Yehei shmei rabba mivarach li'olam u'olmei olmaya. May his great name be blessed forever. Kind of repeating the same thing. Yehei shmei rabba, Yitzchak shmei rabba, right? A lot around his name, God's name. Li'olam, let's look at that for a moment too. Li'olam. ul almei olmaya. The word for forever and the word for, like, olam is world, right? But it's also the same word that's used to describe like everything, right? Always, everywhere, all the time. Olam, olmei, olmaya. It's like a triple repetition of that concept of world. One thing I've noticed in Hebrew prayers, and this is actually, I've seen this in other traditions too, like ancient traditions, there's no like very or a whole lot of or like much. Like you don't see those words. Like, may God's name be prayed a whole lot or a lot, very much so. We don't get a lot of that in these prayers. Rather, what's done is they just repeat the word. So if you ever find a word repeated, its purpose is to basically say very or a lot, right? It's like it's emphasizing muchness, which I think is really interesting. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitalev v'yitalal. Each one of those is a word of praise. Okay. Barach, bracha, bless. Shtabach, hashbacha is praise. Pa'ar, glorified. Yitramam, ram is high, right, exalted. V'yitnaseh, extolled. Hadar is honored. V'yitaleh, you do aliyah. Allah is elevated, go up. V'yithalal, halal is like praise or magnified. Shemei tikudasha, the holy name, barichu, blessed be one. Okay. So that's just a whole bunch of synonyms for praising. And it's the holy name. Le'ela, so before I go to that, so this is like exuberant praises. And in the whole Kaddish, there's nothing about asking for something. In the Hebrew liturgy, there are different forms of prayer. There's bakashot, requests, and hodaot, and thanks, and praises. This is all praise. Like, this is 100%. Like the ginger piece that you're putting to, cleanse your palate is like spicy and excited and extolled. It's just like very specific what this is about. And if you think about what you're saying, it's joyful, which makes it more intriguing when you think about the context in which it's often said at a funeral or for mourners. It's a very joyful prayer. You don't it's like you're not gloomy. You can't say those 8 words of praise and be gloomy at the same time and mean it. Le'ela, and here's the extra word that's added on Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. Le'ela, mikol berachata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata da'amiran bi'alma v'yimru amen. This is Le'ela mikol berachata. Le'ela is, again, Allah, like above, right? Aliyah. Though God is above or transcendent, right, from all blessings, v'shirata, and songs of praise, tushbechata v'nechamata, blessings and hymns and praises, di'amiran bi'alma, that could possibly be uttered, di'amra, that could be amar, spoken in the world. Anyway, let's just say amen. So, praise. Le'ela, even though God is transcendent beyond comprehension of anything that we could even possibly say about God, to even praise God in this world, within this form, within time and space, within our limited understanding, nevertheless, let's just say amen. That's another good key into what this is all about. the fact that there's a reference to God's transcendent nature, that these words are kind of almost pointless, right? God is transcendent of this. God doesn't need this. This isn't even touching the nature of the infinite. Nevertheless, let's say Amen. And when you say Amen, by the way, Amen comes from the word emunah, la'amin. It's belief or faith or testament of testimony. So whenever you say Amen, you're saying, yeah, I agree. Testify to that. Amen, I have faith in this. So, I find that so profound and really inspiring to think about. We often hear this idea that, God doesn't need our prayers. That would almost be a very interesting conception to imagine God needs that. But we elevate ourselves. We bring ourselves into a higher vibration, a higher alignment. We bring ourselves more closely to divinity by acknowledging to the best that we can the nature of divinity. I had this dream once where I'm traveling with this native elder, and we go a long distance and we're chanting the song, and the words are, we give thanks to Great Spirit to carry us through. We give thanks to Great Spirit that carries us through. Both. It's like we are acknowledging a fact, a truth, that God, that Creator, is kind of taking care of us, carrying us through this journey. And we give thanks to Great Spirit to carry us through. Our giving thanks and acknowledgement of this elevates us and makes us available to the grace, makes us receptive and available to the guidance that is. And I just have an immense amount of respect for this prayer because of that. That there's such an emphasis on these praises, and that it's all over our liturgy. That it's actually an opportunity to condition. If you think about the nature of anything that's repeated within any kind of structure or any kind of practice, it's a book holder. Right? It comes before and after these sections of prayers. It punctuates and grounds the entire prayer experience with an acknowledgement of holiness. Right? It's a way of bringing us back to a sort of conditioned posture of attunement. It's really beautiful. So let's continue on, looking at the full Kaddish. Titkabel salosahon uvu'utahon. May the prayers and supplications of all Israel be acceptable. Uvuton di chol Beit Yisrael, kadam avuhon di b'shmaya, to their Father in heaven. V'yimru Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim alinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen. May God's abundant peace and life be granted unto us and all Israel, and we say Amen. Osei shalom bimromav, hu ya'asei shalom alinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen. May the one who creates peace bimromav in the high place, which we can say is ineffable, right? Hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, makes peace for us and all Israel, and then we've also added al kol yoshvei tevel, and all dwellers of this earth. Okay, so the last few phrases of the full Kaddish is bringing it in a little bit. Okay, so we just made these really immense acknowledgements of God's inexpressible greatness. Now, may this, be accepted. May this be favorable. It's funny, could we say, may this be acceptable to you right after we said, we know that we can never quite reach and acknowledge or say enough about the greatness of God. So we kind of we bring it in a little bit, say, okay, we did our best here. The way that I internalize that is we're sealing the prayer. This is enough. May this be acceptable. May this be authentic. And may the prayers and supplications that we're offering here become a blessing of abundant peace and life for all of us, May there be peace as there's peace in heaven. May there be peace for us on earth. And just like bringing it in, because in the end, what's the point of these prayers? Like if we really think about everything that we're doing, fundamentally, it's for our own personal transformation. So it ends with, may there be peace and life and blessings for ourselves and for all the world. And I think without that, it might be easy to get stuck in a little bit of a, we're doing this for God, we're doing this for something outside of ourselves. We're actually seeking our own elevation. So from a more Kabbalistic, mystical point of view, this whole Kaddish is an elevating of ourselves. Right? And then if you say this with the dead in mind, with those who have passed, my growing insight or understanding of it, and this is just what I can understand right now, is there's this quality of gratitude and trust in God's will and in the perfection of all things, and to hold that with respect to someone that we're grieving, right? This is the power of, there's grief, and I'm giving my full attention to the holiness and the unity and the perfection of God's will and the blessings that come from the source. There's something so honoring and beautiful about that, right? I mean, if you think about to be in grief, and let's just remove this necessarily, not just from someone who passed, but just to be in grief. What's the most powerful thing that we can do while in grief? It's to be vulnerable and actually open to the pain, and at the same time say, I trust you. I trust your will. May it be here as it is for you. It's the most beautiful thing I can imagine. In my own experience, if I think about my own journey, my own experiences in suffering, those have been some of the most powerful moments where there's almost a relaxing and opening up and turning upwards and inwards, even when there's pain. I just think that's really, really profound. So there's just one more perspective I want to offer, coming from a discussion that we've had in the Hebrew school community this past summer when we were having Hebrew Hub. There was this one conversation about different times in liturgy, or in this case it was in Passover, where God is used to describe as wrathful or angry, right? We have these contradictions. Actually, they can't both coexist, right? You can't be like completely omniscient and incomprehensible and elevated and high and a pure blessing and also be wrathful. Like those are not, they're antithetical to one another. I would say omniscience and really pure unconditional love itself doesn't know those things. So there's a seeming contradiction in some of these prayers. And I was researching this and wanted to hear what Rambam had to say. And thank you to Stephen, who's not here, for suggesting this. And I just think this is a great way to end, because it's a beautiful reflection on what does it mean for us to be giving any kind of qualities to God, to be ascribing any kind of attributes. So this is from an article by Shannon Frundel from jewishchallenge.org. Knowing our texts and traditions underscore God's love for us, it is essential we prevent students from misunderstanding the notion of a jealous and wrathful God. What follows is a simplified summary of Rambam's approach to an explanation of God's emotions as formulated in Rambam's Moreh Nevuchot, Guide to the Perplexed. Okay. To say that God is the wisest or most powerful, which is similar to what we're doing here, is to imply that God's wisdom or power bears some likeness to ours. Contrasted with God's, the power manifested by us is finite and measurable. Therefore, it is not true to say that God's power is greater than ours, that God's life is more permanent than ours, that God's knowledge is broader than ours, or that God's will is more universal than ours. If that were the case, then God could be put on the same scale as ours, meaning God is a bigger, stronger, better version of something in the created order, such as humans. In that vein, God does not possess emotions, I would say qualities, similar to ours. But the effects of God's actions resemble the effects of our emotions. What this elicits in me is this common question asked in the sort of astrophysics / cosmological, philosophical world. is the universe limited? Like, was there a point where the universe was created? Or is the universe infinite? And which one's scarier to think about? Like, which one's more existential for us? And I think when we think about eternity, what's hard and maybe even a little bit unsettling, we don't know how to think of eternity without eternity being a very, very long ago past that somehow had no beginning and an incredibly infinite future that will never end. We have difficulty thinking of infinity without putting it on a timeline. And so we think of it, okay, well, vast, it's like really big, or eternity, it's really old. But I think there's something deeper than that, and I'll end with this thought. When we speak about that which is sort of incomprehensible to our conditioned time-space thinking, I think we're looking at something that only exists in the present moment, and that eternity isn't a quality of time or magnitude or that which is immeasurably measurable. It's only now. It's something that's only right now. And everything else has a quality and can be quantified. Right? Everything else is quantifiable in some form or another. But God is only now. Eternity is only now. We can only know that when we're now, like when we're in a state of debate, a total closeness or unity even. And maybe we've all tasted that at different moments along our own personal journey, what it's like to be in the pure presence of God. Of course, then all the words they're not there anymore. There's nothing there. We couldn't use any adjectives because it's just experience, and there's no time either. I mean, anything happens in that kind of place of presence. It's a holy experience that I'm speaking to. For most of us, most of the time, we're not in that holy present moment unity experience where God is. Like, God only exists now. God doesn't exist in the past or in the future. So what are we doing with these prayers? One beautiful perspective. We're bringing ourselves, we're kind of like courting ourselves back into the moment by doing our best to speak about the ineffable. Like, we can't be enough out of presence and say enough words to reach the thing that's beyond all words. So we're doing our best with time, with words, with adjectives. And I think if we can recognize that these are really in their highest understanding, perhaps meant to be a portal, or almost like an entry into something that's beyond the words, which is where we find God. And we can really use the prayers in a way that brings us into a true recognition of what we're trying to say and express in these words. So, thank you. And what's the greeting that you say in Yom Kippur? Shana Tova, Gemar Chatima Tova.
Before we get started with our morning blessings, I just wanted to add the Shakwa, enlightening, that an interesting phenomenon came about with the diaspora, with, of course, the population of Jews living outside of Israel, leading to a great population of Jews not knowing Hebrew over the years, more and more. So, and the more reform or the more liberal we get, the less Hebrew speakers are understanders of Hebrew in the general congregation. And so we actually have a lot of prayers. Let's say this congregation, for example, we have a lot of prayers, blessings, and readings that we enjoy them, but many of us don't know, the real, I get the idea of this prayer, right? Given the context and where it comes in and all of that, but I'm not really sure word for word what this prayer means. And that's an individual's journey, whether they, stop the world and get off and say, dang it, what does the Elaine talk about? I want to find out. But the Mourner's Kaddish, I wanted to just add, is one of those where we know when we say it, and many people assume, well, maybe it had something to do with death and dying because it is called the Mourner's Kaddish. But the Kaddish, and this is my point now, so there's, Ari mentioned that there's various versions, right? So let's think about the way we communicate that version in the way that we either read it or chant it. So the Chetzi Kaddish, which is the shortened one, nothing to do with mourners, death or dying, is simply that, like Ari said, that piece of ginger slice. I always had the ginger with the sushi though. I didn't realize it was I didn't realize it was in between.
Yeah. You can do that too.
Yeah. But I see it as a transition, telling the congregation, okay, we're moving from one thing, we're about to start another. So the Chetzi Kaddish, Yitgadal v'Yitgadash Shamei Rabba, right? There's that little melody there. And then the full Kaddish almost sounds like an auction, right? Yitgadal v'Yitgadash Shamei Rabba, Yitmadi Rachutivim, right? It goes like that. And that's between big sections like the Amidah before the Torah service. But the interesting part, for me anyway, is the tone and the intonation that we give with the Mourner's Kaddish. Because it sounds sad. Yitkadal, Yitkadash, Shemei Rabba, Bi'alma, Yidrachude, Bi'alim Mahude. We express it as if those words express mourning. So that really says something about what we can give without understanding what something may mean, but we give it meaning in the way that we express it.
Beautiful.
Yeah, thanks. All right, so we're now transitioned. We're blessed to have Ari and Armando, who are both kind of giving us our first hour as they did on Rosh Hashanah. So beginning with the meditation and teaching, and now we transition to our morning blessings, Brachot HaShachar. Armando, I'm going to go slip off for a minute and check on a child care issue.
Boker Tov, everybody. For those of us who are wearing talit,